Canada's annual inflation rate edges up to 1.9% in January. Lebanon to negotiate a fresh deal with IMF. And Goldman Sachs increases its 2025 gold price forecast to $3,100 per ounce. Welcome to the Qnews Economic Bulletin, where we bring you the latest developments shaping the global economy, from key market trends and financial updates to regional economic highlights and forecasts. We provide essential news and analysis to keep you informed. Welcome back. We start off with the United States, as home builder sentiment dropped sharply in February, hitting a 5-month low. The National Association of Home Builders Wells Fargo Housing Market Index fell 5 points to 42, the lower since September. The decline reflects growing concerns over tariffs on imported materials like lumber and appliances, as well as rising mortgage rates. President Trump's recent tariff hikes, including a 10% levy on Chinese imports and a 25% duty on steel and aluminum, have added to builders' uncertainty. On another note, China has called for a debate at the World Trade Organization to address trade turbulence, following U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to impose sweeping 10% tariffs on all Chinese imports. The World Trade Organization discussion, expected late Tuesday or early Wednesday, marks the first formal debate on rising trade disputes at the General Council. World Trade Organization chief has urged members to avoid retaliatory moves, warning of catastrophic consequences for global trade. European Union's competition chief Teresa Ribera has stated that President Donald Trump's trade policies have upended the trustful relationship between Washington and Brussels. Ribera warned that the bloc will not be pressured into changing its laws. Her comments come as the European Union prepares to retaliate against new U.S. tariffs on steel, aluminium, cars, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductor chips. European Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic is in Washington for high-stakes talks, while businesses warn the tariffs are creating uncertainty and disrupting markets.
European Union has been absolutely brutal on trade.
The recent announcement by the Trump administration to impose global reciprocal tariffs has sparked significant concerns within the European Union, EU, regarding the future of US-EU economic relations. The move threatens to strain the long-standing partnership with EU leaders, warning of immediate retaliatory measures if the tariffs are implemented. Such actions could lead to substantial economic and political repercussions, given the massive trade volume between the two economies, which totaled $975.9 billion in 2024. The U.S. trade deficit with the EU surged by 12.9% to $235.6 billion in 2024, driven by rising imports, including $235.6 billion in 2024, driven by rising imports, including $127 billion worth of semaglutide, a key ingredient in weight loss drugs. This reflects the deep economic interdependence between the two economies. The EU warns that U.S. tariffs could raise costs for European products, reduce sales, and disrupt supply chains. Retaliatory tariffs by the EU would similarly increase prices for American goods in Europe markets. The resulting uncertainty could deter investments and hinder economic growth. The EU is prioritizing negotiations to avoid a trade war, but remains prepared to defend its interests through counter-tariffs or World Trade Organization complaints. The bloc's existing trade agreements and new tools, such as the anti-coercion instrument, provide leverage in addressing trade disputes.
Statistics Canada has reported that the country's annual inflation rate edged up to 1.9% in January from 1.8% in December. It attributed the increase to the rising gasoline and natural gas prices, offsetting the impact of a temporary sales tax holiday. The reading matched analyst forecasts and marked 6 consecutive months of inflation at or below the Bank of Canada's 2% target midpoint. The central bank's preferred metrics, CPI median and CPI trim, for measuring core inflation both rose to 2.7%, up from 2.6% and 2.5% respectively in December. The Office for National Statistics has reported that British pay growth surged in late 2024, with private sector wages excluding bonuses rising by 6.2% year-on-year, the fastest pace in a year. The data, which highlighted persistent inflationary pressures, underscored the Bank of England's cautious approach to cutting interest rates despite a sluggish economy. Pay growth across the economy, excluding bonuses, rose by 5.9% in the first quarter, the strongest since April 2024. While including bonuses, it increased by 6%, the fastest since late 2023. Joining us from Hong Kong is economist Mr. Benny Kwok to discuss the latest developments related to Trump's tariffs and the reactions from affected countries. Thank you, sir, for joining us on the Economic Bulletin. And let me start by asking you, so China has called for a debate at the World Trade Organization on trade turbulence following Trump's sweeping 10% tariffs. What do you think China aims to achieve with this move?
Okay, thank you for inviting me. So, what China is doing to the WTO is just a gesture to show China is absolutely against what the Donald Trump's move on the tariffs. Of course, Beijing would understand and know the final result with the United States is the bilateral negotiation, and also whether either Beijing or Washington would give the benefits or either mutual benefits for each side. So for the WTO mechanism, I don't think China would really rely on and believe, and it is just as I have said, it's just a gesture to show what China is against, what the United States is now doing, and show the other parts of the world that China is representing all the other countries except the United States is against the Donald Trump's tariff move. It is the biggest reason.
Let me ask you, how significant is this World Trade Organization discussion in the broader context of rising global trade tensions?
I would say, okay, so the WTO mechanism was established during the era of the globalization is booming and ongoing. So both the Western world and also the China and the developing world is believing globalization, economic globalization is good for the world. But now, including United States, including Europe, including maybe China as well, they are doing the opposite. That is, they are dropping the mercantilism policies. They are having their policies of protecting their own industries, not to be under the disadvantage of the other countries' competitions. So I would say, okay, now we still have the WTO mechanisms, but it seems the WTO is dead because nobody, I would say the major economies and the great powers do not believe or rely on the WTO mechanism as well. Maybe the small country, yes, but not the major powers.
Now, speaking of the mechanisms, the World Trade Organization chief has warned against retaliatory measures, citing catastrophic consequences. How likely is that member states will heed this advice?
I would say first, the Donald Trump won't listen to his advice because being the U.S. president and even being the United States, the Washington believe it is the only global power of the world, and it is the only the power that can decide the rule of the world. And especially Donald Trump believe the WTO mechanism and the rule of the economic globalization is being greatly exploited by the rise by China. So that's why now we are seeing the unilateral movement, the belief and the movement by the Washington, especially Donald Trump. And also, of course, China is benefits a lot from being the members of WTO in 2001. And now Xi Jinping and Beijing also knows the Washington does not believe the mechanism anymore. And now they also know the United States is doing all the things against China. So that's why I would believe the China, okay, yes, he's doing the formal procedures of filing all kinds of complaints against the United States, but it doesn't believe it does not believe the mechanism or the WTO would help China anymore. Yeah.
Now, sir, moving on to the European Union, which has expressed serious concerns over Trump's global reciprocal tariffs. What are the most immediate risks for the US-EU economic relations?
I would say it is the so-called the tariff. Okay, just see what the Donald Trump do in the first against the Canada and Mexico. Oh, it is just I would say it is just a gesture of Donald Trump to forcing the Canada and Mexico to comply with the United American interests for the illegal immigrants and also fentanyl. And also the most important is to forcing the Canada and the Mexico to stand against China together with the United States. So for the potential or maybe the tariff against the European Union, I would say it is also the same gesture for the Donald Trump to negotiate. It is his style to negotiate with no matter it is allies or no matter it is adversaries of the United States. It is the style of Donald Trump. Okay, that is Donald Trump would like to negotiate, or maybe he doesn't believe. Okay, it is on the interest of the American, and then he will use strong words, all kinds of bluffing to try to forcing the maybe allies or the adversary to compile and with the United States. It is his style. So I would say yes. There is the trade or maybe conflicts between the United States and in Europe, but it is not just within the Donald Trump years. It exists for many years, but before Donald Trump getting the White House office to Joe Biden or maybe Obama, or even before, and there is a trade deficit on the side of the United States from the European Union. So I would say it is just a style for the Donald Trump to get the European to the table to negotiate, or maybe he would would like to the European Union to give up something to try to benefit the United States.
But sir, given that the US-EU trade volume reached nearly $1 trillion in 2024, so how disruptive could these tariffs be for business?
You mean how disruptive on the potential tariff, are you asking this one?
Yes.
Okay, I would say it is okay. What I truly believe is it may not be as disruptive as the market and all the analysts believe, because there's I would say because between the European Union and the United States, they have the very close and strong relations for not just a decade, maybe 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, or maybe half of their century. So I would say now the buffering, the so-called the tariff buffering from Donald Trump is just an action, or maybe it's just a move, or maybe just a method for the Donald Trump to get the European Brussels to the negotiation table. And now the Donald Trump is waiting for the European Union to offer what they can offer for the United States. Same as the same. So I could take the same similar example for the Ukrainian crisis. Now Donald Trump is negotiating to try to negotiate directly with Russia, and now the other NATO members and Europe is now fearing, is afraid of whether the United States is trying to betraying the European allies. So I would think, and I would say, Donald Trump is adopting the same actions, and he's waiting for the European Union and see what they can do to try to benefit the American interests in terms of the Donald Trump points of view, of course.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Mr. Benny Kok, for your insights and for all the information you provided us with. We're so glad to have you on the Economic Bulletin. Now, back to our news. The Reserve Bank of Australia cut its cash rate by 25 basis points to 4.1% on Tuesday, marking its first rate reduction since November 2020. The decision follows a surprise slowdown in core inflation to 3.2% in the fourth quarter, bringing headline inflation back within the bank's 2 to 3% target band at 2.4%. However, the central bank governor emphasized that the cut does not imply a series of future reductions, describing market expectations of 2 more cuts this year as unrealistic. Australian Treasurer has said that the country's central bank's decision to cut interest rates showed the worst of the country's inflation challenges were over.
Well, we do share the Reserve Bank's concern about the uncertain global outlook. I've expressed that to you and in other forums for some time now. The world is an uncertain place, and we see that reflected in the Reserve Bank's statement today. And growth in our economy has been soft. People have been under very substantial pressure and continue to be under pressure.
In Africa, Statistics South Africa has reported that the country's official unemployment rate fell to 31.9% in the fourth quarter of 2024, down from 32.1% in the previous quarter. The decline is driven by job gains in the finance and manufacturing sectors. This marks the second consecutive quarterly decline, according to data from Statistics South Africa. However, the expanded unemployment rate, which includes discouraged job seekers, remained stubbornly high at 41.9%, highlighting the country's persistent structural challenges. The National Bureau of Statistics has reported that Nigeria's annual inflation rate fell to 24.48% in January, down sharply from December's 34.8%. This follows a rebasing of the country's price index for the first time in over a decade. Statistician General Prince emphasized that the drop does not indicate a sudden slowdown in inflation, but rather reflects the updated methodology. Food inflation, a major contributor to overall inflation, stood at 26.08% year-on-year in January after the rebasing. Egyptian President Abdel El-Sisi has arrived in Madrid for an official visit aimed at strengthening bilateral relations between Egypt and Spain. According to the Egyptian presidency, the visit will also include his participation in an economic event alongside Spanish business leaders. Presidential spokesperson Ambassador Mohammed Al-Shenawi confirmed that a key highlight of the visit will be the signing of an agreement elevating Egypt-Spain relations to the level of a strategic partnership. Additionally, several memorandums of understanding are expected to be signed covering various fields of cooperation. According to the Central Bank of Egypt, Egypt's annual urban inflation remained stable at 24% in January 2025, slightly down from 24.1% in December 2024, marking its lowest rate in 2 years. The slight decline was driven by a slowdown in non-food inflation, which fell to 26.2%, offsetting a modest rise in food inflation to 20.8%. Core inflation also eased, dropping to 22.6% from 23.2% in December. On a monthly basis, urban inflation rose by 1.5%, with food prices, especially poultry and rice, leading the increase ahead of Ramadan. Lebanon's new government has approved a policy statement outlining plans to negotiate a fresh deal with the International Monetary Fund and address the country's financial collapse. A policy statement approved by the cabinet emphasized economic revival through banking sector restructuring. Since its financial system collapsed in 2019, Lebanon has struggled with a severe economic crisis, defaulting on its debt in 2020. A 2022 IMF funding deal stalled due to unfulfilled reforms. Finance Minister Yassin Jabir has already met with the IMF's representative in Beirut to restart discussions. Jordan and Kuwait have signed 2 agreements to finance the 3rd phase of the General Education Infrastructure Project and the Roads and Bridges Rehabilitation Project. Each project is valued at 10 million Kuwaiti dinars, equivalent to approximately $32.6 million, bringing the total funding to $65.2 million. The agreements are part of Kuwait's commitment under the 2018 Mecca Summit to provide Jordan with a $500 million concessional loan program aimed at supporting the kingdom's development priorities and improving essential public services. Oil lost early gains on Tuesday and prices were back near their previous close in the face of uncertainty over how supply will be affected by Ukraine-Russia peace talks, international trade tariffs, and OPEC Plus crude output. Brent crude futures were down at $75.18 per barrel, retreating from $76.07 earlier in the session. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures were up to $71.17 a barrel. Goldman Sachs has increased its 2025 gold price forecast to $3,100 per ounce, up from $2,890, citing strong central bank demand. The bank estimates central bank purchases could add 9% to gold prices, with ETF inflows also expected to rise as interest rates fall. If policy uncertainty remains high, gold could surge to $3,300, while steady Fed rates might limit gains to $3,060. Goldman also noted that escalating U.S. fiscal concerns could push prices to $3,250. Central banks, especially those with large U.S. Treasury reserves, are expected to boost gold purchases further. Gold prices rose on Tuesday as concerns over economic growth due to uncertainty surrounding U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff plans prompted safe haven flows into bullion. Spot gold gained 0.9% to $2,923.89 an ounce after hitting a record high of $2,942.70 last week. U.S. gold futures added 1.4% to $2,940.30. That's all for now. Here's a wrap-up of what we've covered. Canada's annual inflation rate edges up to 1.9% in January. Lebanon to negotiate a fresh deal with IMF. And Goldman Sachs increases its 2025 gold price forecast to $3,100 per ounce. This concludes our economic bulletin for today. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.